Well, let me just say welcome to everybody. Good evening. We're here for the Colfax BRT Community Open House. So nice to see so many of you joining virtually and also in person. As I said about a week ago, we haven't had this opportunity in a long time. So just want to appreciate everybody showing up. I think these conversations are sometimes much easier when we're face to face. My name is Abby Abel. I'm part of the project team. I'm going to be facilitating tonight with the help of a fantastic support team. I also just wanted to acknowledge this great space and thank Carl Madison Rec Center for making it open to us this evening. It really is special to be here. So it's been a few months since we've connected. And I will tell you that the project team has been incredibly busy and productive working on some key elements of the project, including BRT logo development, thinking through some of the early concepts around streetscape design, and also doing some of the analysis around traffic, parking, and safety. All of these topics we will address this evening. And then actually on that note, the agenda will really follow suit, so we can quickly go to that agenda. We'll start off with the project update. I know some of you are deeply familiar with the project, some of you may not have as much familiarity, so we want to make sure we sort of level set from the get-go. And then we'll jump right into where we are with logo development, as well as hear from arts and venues on the public art process. So that's sort of the start of the meeting, and then the meat of the discussion this evening will really be around streetscape design concepts and also traffic, parking, and safety. So we have a lot to cover, and we'll get right to it. But before we do, I'd like to welcome David Kratzinger, our transit director from the Department of Transportation Infrastructure. Introduce yourself and welcome.
Thanks, Abby, and again, thanks everyone for being here tonight. We're really looking forward to your input and ideas. As always, we're bringing some answers to you from prior meetings, so there will be more complete answers, and then we're bringing some work that's in progress that we want your input on as we go, so that we don't bake the cake all the way before we get your input. There are a lot of our partners here in the audience as well, so I want to thank RTD and City of Aurora for being here. It takes a lot of folks to help represent transit riders in each of the jurisdictions. I don't see any of our CDOT partners yet, but CDOT is also a strong partner, making sure that Colfax as a state highway connecting other state highway facilities is functioning properly. And then wanted to thank the larger team that's put all this information together. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the next slide, and I'll take you through the orientation. We've got Brian Pinkerton will be joining us online a little bit later. He had a conflict. Brian McLaren is our project manager and design engineer. He's away on vacation, but if we have any answers or any questions that we can't answer tonight, we'll get one of those gentlemen to follow up with you, and then you'll hear from these other fine folks on the other topics that Abby had up on that first slide. Go ahead to the next one. All right, so again, these are our partners. Each of these partners has a different part of the project that theirs to own and maintain, and they're providing funding and resources and staff. And we wouldn't sometimes believe that the government worked so well together, but I'm proud that we're doing that on this project. It's super exciting. Thank our city council representatives. We have any elected officials hiding out in the audience tonight. I want to make sure you guys are recognized. I don't see any at the moment. If you have any come in, we'll make sure our council representatives. Colfax Business Improvement Districts, there's 3 business improvement districts along the stretch of Colfax. So thank you all for being here and being a valuable part of the input process. We heard a lot from our business improvement districts about 2 weeks ago, and then partners who represent different groups in the community to make sure that this project is delivered access for all. They're easy to reach no matter how you walk, stroll, or roll. Next slide. All right.
Thank you, David. So because we are in this fun hybrid environment, we want to have some housekeeping rules. Let me just share, first of all, that the format of the evening is going to be about 75 minutes of presentation. We will have 2 points for Q&A, so folks in the room and folks online will be able to engage in some discussion. And then following the presentation, for those of you who are here, or those of you online who can make it here on time or would like to make it here on time, we'll have an open forum discussion. So those of you in the room can see different stations around the room, and I'll describe those to you later. But essentially, it'll give you an opportunity to talk in greater depth about the topics and with the subject matter experts that you choose. And so we really encourage you to stay and have some of those more detailed discussions. In terms of the housekeeping rules, for the folks in the room when we have Q&A, please wait for the mic to be handed to you. Otherwise, no one who's joining virtually will be able to hear you. So we appreciate your patience just waiting for the mic. For the folks joining us virtually, again, thank you. You'll have an opportunity to submit your questions via the chat at any point during the webinar. We will take a look at those questions and address them to the best of our ability during Q&A. I will also note that this meeting is being recorded, and then the recording will be posted in short order to the project website in case you missed some of the details or want to share it with some of your friends and colleagues. And last but not least, we have Nora and Francisco in the back here. Nora and Francisco, if you could just flag. Nora and Francisco are our interpreters this evening. And so if anybody who needs interpretation, for instance, please flag that for us now, and we can provide those services to you. Thank you, Nora. Appreciate that. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it back to Dave Pretzinger to provide a project update. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Debbie. All right, so let's this is the level set part. So here's a graphics that some of you have seen, some of you haven't. So the red lanes, the Colfax BRT is intended to operate in the middle of the street with one lane in each direction for general purpose traffic. The yellow bars are where the stations will go. So you have a station on either side of the street to keep the cross section narrow, and the buses they can operate with a standard right door boarding. There'll be left turns and right turn bays at the signal lights intersections. And then otherwise there'll be some other treatments along the way that have people move to the intersections that have the traffic signals to be able to make those turns. Next slide. So we've got 3 sections of the corridor, about 9.9 miles altogether, about 2 miles in downtown where the yellow stretches are a little less than 2 miles. Those are just existing bus stops on 15th and 17th. We've got dedicated bus lanes. Most of the blocks downtown have 2 dedicated bus lanes. You'll see off the red paint on the streets downtown. If you get downtown, we'll use the existing stops and service will go all the way to Union Station. In the kind of green teal section, that's where the central running bus rapid transit stations that were on the previous image will be constructed. And then in the Aurora section, that's the Aurora section is its side running, and so the boarding is at the side of the street. So now because the street network changes at the Aurora Denver line, where you've got the 13th and 14th couplet running through, and the 17th, 18th couplet on the north runs all the way out to about Yosemite, and then it's a much smaller neighborhood streets east of there. So that's the transition. Total number of stations, I forget the off the top of my head, I think it's got 16, 17 stations total. And about a third of a mile spacing. So a little tighter spacing on the 15L stops today, a little further than the regular 15. If you happen to write it. All right, next slide. So I won't read all the stuff on the far side of the slide, but we are going through a very extensive process to evaluate all of those things in, around, for, and with the community. traffic and noise and air and safety and security. Different parts of those elements get evaluated at different levels as we go. The further we go into the project, the less decision-making there is about what's in and out of the project, and the more decision-making there is about exactly how it should look and how it should function. We are doing a categorical exclusion, which is a federal term for environmental clearance, community and environmental clearance. It's the lowest level. We don't have any threatened and endangered species or large waterways or things like that that would take us to a higher level of evaluation. Next slide. The project will be heavily funded in partnership with the Federal Transit Administration. So we're pulling down federal dollars, and we've done an early look at how competitive this corridor is against all other projects in the nation of this type of bus traffic transit corridors. And so we, across the bottom, there's different criteria. Financially, the project is extremely strong. We'll get a high rating. In the middle, we've got a medium high rating for all of our land use. So many of you all have been through a lot of planning processes since 2019 or before, and there's lots of good work to establish how the city will grow and how the community will continue to evolve in this part of Denver. And then the mobility improvements, we'll get further into that. We're going to increase transit ridership quite a bit. The streets aren't getting any wider, so we have to make some accommodations to accomplish moving more people in the same space. And we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go forward. Next slide. Current timeline. This is a traditional delivery method, which means everything's in sequence. We'll finish the design this year in the environmental process. We'll start that process this month with Federal Transit Administration to secure those funds with our final application a year from now. 2023 to 2024 is the final design process, that we're just at about 30% design. We'll try to get to 100% design by early 2024, which means it can go to construction as early as 2024. The process of releasing contracts and then awarding contracts and then going to construction takes some time. So if we do that in a traditional way, it'll be 2028 for delivery. So the city is looking at ways with RTD and Aurora as our partners to try to see if we can accelerate that. We've heard from previous meetings, Joel, we've been talking about this for a long time, and you're ready to see the rubber hit the road. So we are trying to accelerate. Next one. All right. Turn it over back to Abby, and we'll introduce branding and naming.
David, thank you. I will just point out, we've heard from some of the folks that have joined virtually, it's a little hard to hear. So for presenters, if you could please just hold the mic as close to your mouth as possible and speak clearly, it would help them quite a bit. So appreciate that in advance. I want to note that so Sean Lingle, who will be joining us here momentarily from Jones Worley, has been doing a lot of work with her team on the naming of the BRT. And so many of you were involved in that process over the last several months. And so she's going to share with you, if you're not already aware, where we've landed with the naming, and also show you some of the work that's been done around the logo, the BRT logo development. And good news is you'll be able to weigh in on some of those options, if not during the meeting, certainly after the meeting. And so I would like to hand it over to Sean, who's joining us virtually, to take us through that. Hello, Sean.
Thank you. Before we get into the presentation, just wanted to prep everybody. We will be voting on logos at the end of the presentation, or end of my presentation. So if you want to scan this QR code with your cell phone camera, or if you just want to go to menti.com and type in the code on the screen, that'll get you all set up for the voting later. And we'll show this number and this QR code again later. So if you miss it, don't worry, we'll be showing it again. Can you go to the next slide, please? So before we get into the the logos, we wanted to first take you back to where we were. Last time we met with you was in the middle of February, and we were in the final process of selecting a name. And just as a reminder, the name selection will be for the entire BRT system for the entire city and county of Denver and region, Aurora too, not just for the Colfax line. So just wanted to remind everybody that this name is an overarching name, not specific to the route. Next slide, please. So when we met back in February, the top choice of this group was Lynx, followed by the other three. And if you're going to go to the next slide, the whole process involved a lot of names, and we narrowed it down through input from the agencies that are involved, from the bids, from stakeholders, and now we're here to get your input as well. And then we provide all of the input to Denver and RTD, and then they select the final, they selected the final name, and they will also select the final logo based on the input that they hear from everyone. And next slide. You'll be very excited to know that Lynx, your top choice, was also the top choice of other groups and was the one that was selected. And the reason that folks really liked Lynx, top reason was it's a homonym to link, so it signifies how the BRT line will help link customers to their jobs, to education, to medical care, and so forth. So that was a really nice play on words. But also a lynx is a pretty fast little cat. And so the speed being another BRT feature was also a positive. The fact that it's been reintroduced to Colorado and is making a comeback was also a factor. And then, of course, a strong brand can be developed from it. And it's a cute little animal. And in addition, the translation into Spanish is very close. So there's just a lot of positives for Lynx, and that put it ahead of the other names. If you go to the next slide, please. So we have 4 logos for you to look at and to vote on. We'll be showing them all 4 on one screen at the end. So you can see them all at one time. The first one shows the full body of the cat. This is the whole lynx, and you can see the special features like the ear tufts and the beard in front and the little short tail in the back. And as you notice, if you've ever looked at a Puma logo, lynxes are a little bit chubbier than pumas. So you can see that we've made it very true to form. And then another nice feature, the font was selected by the project team, and one of the desired elements of the font is, if you notice, the X is also an arrow. It has an arrow built into it, and the font also leans is italic and leans to the right, which also gives it a feeling of motion. So that was that font is in every logo that you'll see. Next logo. This logo is a little bit different. We also wanted to show the speed. So we just are showing the head and shoulders of the cat rather than the whole body. And it seems to convey speed pretty well. We've also got the streaks that are coming off of the body, which is also connoting speed. And again, the X with the arrow in it. Next slide. The third version is the cat coming out of the logo, propelling from the arrow. And again, connoting speed with the, I don't know if I wouldn't call them flames, but the streaks that are coming out of the cat also further gives the impression of speed, which is, again, one of the main benefits of the BRT line. And then the fourth logo, a variation on logo number 3 is the cat is also, again, coming out of the X and the arrow, but a little bit different format. Some people prefer this design, some people prefer the other design. So we're going to put them all on the screen for you. And if you want to go to the next slide. And again, you can scan this QR code with your phone camera, or you can go to menti.com and type in the code on the screen, and it will allow you to rank your top 3. We want you to rank 1, 2, and 3, not just your top choice, but 1, 2, and 3, please. Just to let you know what will happen next. Again, Same processes for the naming. We will take the results from this group and the results from the other groups that we've met with and give it to the city and also RTD, and then they'll make the final vote based on that. And then the next step in the process is we'll add color to the logo, and we'll be coming back out to you for input on the color options as well.
Sean, thank you very much. And I'll just, for those in the room who may have missed that QR code, we have the poster over there. You'll have plenty of time to rank your options before you leave if you would like. So moving right along, we want to acknowledge that public art is obviously is and will continue to be a big piece of the Colfax corridor, really reflecting some of the vibrant characteristics of different segments along that corridor. And so for that very reason, we wanted to start to lay the groundwork around public art for this project. And so we've invited Brendan Picker from Arts and Venue to come up and really talk about the program and the process at an early stage. So thank you, Brendan.
Thanks, Abby, and thanks everybody for being here. I'm excited to talk about public art and our process. Again, my name is Brendan Picker, and I've been with the program for about 8 years. We can go to the next slide. So our program was established in 1988. In 1991, it was officially voted on as an ordinance for the city. And essentially what it does is it takes 1% of any capital improvement project with a design and construction budget of over $1 million, and we take 1% from the construction budget to spend on site-specific, permanent, unique public art for that project. We've installed more than 350 pieces since the program started in 1988. And we have over 450 artworks in our collection. So there's about 100 in there that were either donated to the city or commissioned by the city before the public art program started. Next slide. So again, our goals are to commission permanent site-specific public art. The artwork should speak to the location, it should speak to the facility, the community, a group of people, a time in history. It should enhance the experience of visiting the certain facility. So we have actually 3 public artworks right here at the Carlin Madison Rec Center, which I can talk about later if you like. And it's selected through this semi-public process. We'll get into next slide. What's not considered art is signage or wayfinding, also mass-produced objects, reproductions of original works of art, and landscaping. So we're not going to spend that 1% on any of these items, but we will, next slide, spend it on any of these items. So sculpture obviously is popular public art, painting, graphic design, printmaking, mosaics, terrazzo, photography, film and video, ceramics, textiles, earthwork, and even light and sound art. Next slide. So our selection process is pretty straightforward, and it's the same for every single project. We create a selection panel, so I'll get a call from our budget office that says, here's your $50,000 for art for this new facility that we're building. And I have to create a unique art selection panel for every project. This panel is responsible for reviewing the site, reviewing the budget, really getting into the nitty-gritty about what kind of art we might commission, where the artwork might go, any kind of themes that bubble up from the community. And we draft a request for qualifications, which is basically a call for art. And we want artists to apply with images of their past work, a resume, and a short letter of intent describing why they're interested in this particular project. From that pool of applications, the panel will go through our online system and give every application a score. At our next meeting, I'll actually cut out the bottom 50% of applications that didn't meet that average score, and we'll discuss all the other applications that kind of were the cream of the crop. At that point, the panel will strive for consensus. It doesn't always work that way, but we will select between 3 and 5 finalists, pay them a stipend, and give them about 6 to 8 weeks to create proposals. So they can meet with the design team, they can meet with public art staff, they can meet with the panel, and really talk about the site and the project. And then they come back to our 3rd and final meeting and present those proposals to the panel. And at that point, the panel will select their favorite concept. Next slide. So the panel is really, they're responsible for eligibility. So is this a Colorado only call, or is this a national or even international call? Again, the selection method, how the project relates to the site, some of the themes, some of the possible locations for art, the criteria for that RFQ, and really the essential, the duty is those aesthetic decisions that are made. Next slide. So again, that selection panel is approved by our Denver Commission on Cultural Affairs before we even get started, and they identify all those priorities. Once they make that selection for a concept, for a proposal, it goes before our standing public art committee. And this is a standing committee with some city employees from planning and parks and then also volunteers from the community, architects, landscape architects, engineers, and they're really technical. They're really there to troubleshoot any issues they might see with the proposal, talk about safety, durability, ADA accessibility, all those sort of more technical issues. Once they approve the concept with some feedback, they go back to the Denver Commission on Cultural Affairs, which is appointed by the mayor to deal with arts and cultural issues for the city. And they really approve a fair and transparent process. If we follow our own rules, that everybody on the panel feel heard. Then, of course, we go to the mayor. Mayor signs off on the decision, and then I put the artist under contract with the city and help them get through all the benchmarks in that contract to create a successful project. Next slide. I think this is one of the final slide, or almost the final slide, but our agency, Denver Arts and Venues, is really committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So it's woven into all of our programs and all of our initiatives. So one of our goals for every single art selection panel is that 50% or more of those participants come from underrepresented communities. So BIPOC, LGBTQA, and people with disabilities. So this is something that we track internally to ensure that our panels are really diverse and inclusive. And I think that's it. There's one more slide? That's it, yeah. Questions or?
Thank you, Brendan. Yep, you can.
Good.
We're going to take a pause for a pause. We're going to do a Q&A. So just to remind everybody, we've sort of shared a project update. We've sort of talked to you a little bit about where we are with the BRT logo development, and Brendan is kind enough to come from Arts and Venues to share a little bit about the arts, sort of public art program and process. And so we want to take about 5 minutes. We'll take some questions from the room to begin with, and then any questions follow up that have been submitted via chat on the webinar, we can address those then. Any questions from the room? Yes, in the front, and then I'll go to the back. Just one moment and we'll bring the mic to you. And as a reminder, if you're asking your question, please make sure that you have a mic and speak clearly into the mic so all of your friends virtually can hear you.
Hi, my name is Miles Angler. I've been involved since the beginning of this project. There's some questions I've got about traffic and parking that have not, I'm also a stakeholder that still have not been answered. I'm just wondering if you guys will address them. Some of them were with only, I live in Congress Park, with only 2 left turns. How is the traffic going to change? You're running statistics, you're running numbers to figure out what's going to happen with the load. I'd like to know what's going to happen on those side streets. If parking is going to be removed, ECAP also allowed higher density, as well as parking reductions for that overlay part of Blueprint Denver. And how is that impacting those numbers? And then on 14th, ECAP also wanted to put that East Central Area Plan, also wants to put a bike lane on 14th. And so how does that all fit together, and traffic changes on 14th as well? So these are some actually major changes to the neighborhood. And so understanding those and how you've done those calculations as you apply to the federal government, I think will impact the neighborhood directly. And we just need to be able to let the residents on those streets know and what are you going to do about it? And I've been asking these questions for a while now, and I've still not had any answers from them.
So Miles, I would say you were at the right meeting. I would ask, however, that you wait until we get to the Q&A after the second Q&A, because it'll be helpful for everybody who I'm guessing has very similar questions to hear the content that Charlie Alexander will share from the Fair and Fierce Traffic Safety and Parking Analysis. So if you want to hold those questions, Miles, and we will certainly get to them, when we get following his content. We'll also have the opportunity to engage with Charlie and the team more directly about some of those more specific questions. So we appreciate them, and I know they're top of mind for many of you in the room. So hang tight on that, and we will address them. Any other? Yeah, I'm going to go to the back. You could wait for a mic. Thank you.
All right. My name's Keith. I'm just a concerned citizen. And I just want to ask what mechanisms do you guys have in place to prevent the inevitable bus rapid transit creep? Because first they're coming for the transit priority signals, and then they're coming for the dedicated lanes. And by the end of this absolutely shamefully long timeline, we're gonna just have another bus with some different branding. I just want to know what mechanisms you guys and like checks and balances you guys have in place to keep this from pulling a Philadelphia and becoming nothing.
And I'm sorry, your name was again? Keith. David, I'm going to let you take that, respond to that, and then we can keep moving.
So, Keith, thanks for the question. And in short, City Council is your elected officials, and we've got the business improvement district and a wide stakeholder audience, and we're doing this meeting tonight to make sure we get input of folks and we deliver a project that serves the community. So we're going to be watching this, so it's either creeps into something too expensive or crawls back in a hole, it becomes nothing. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a few more. I saw some additional hands. Yes, we'll take this and then the woman in the back. And I would ask, as you're thinking about the questions, if you could stay to the topics that have been presented up to this point, we would appreciate it. We will certainly get to the other topics a little bit later in the presentation. Yes. Please.
So I have two questions. My name is Allison. Quick question about public art. I assume it's going to go in after all of the buses in. Yes, no?
That's a great question, Allison. And Allison's actually served on an art selection panel before.
Would highly recommend. If you ever have an opportunity to get an art selection panel, highly recommend.
So what we'll try to do, we'll probably kick off the public art process for this. I think at the last meeting, I said it maybe a year from now. I'm thinking more like 6 months, maybe at the beginning of next year. So we can try to integrate as best we can with the construction as it happens. Again, I can't speak to what kind of artwork it will be or where it might be. That's kind of a discussion with public art staff, the design team, and the public art selection panel that's created. So, but hopefully we can integrate some public art along the route, and so it's not coming in later. We can also spend the funds within a mile radius of any capital project. So potentially, if there's parks or open space that are within a mile radius, we can potentially spend some of those funds in those areas if there's not already public art in those locations. It can sometimes be difficult to shoehorn public art into a corridor like Colfax with buses. So it might not make sense accessibility and safety wise to put art at every single station, but we can talk about that when the process starts.
And then my second part to that was, how does one get on the art selection committee?
If you're interested, you can go to .org. If you go, there's a link at the bottom of the For Artists page, I believe, where you can sign up to put your name in the hat to serve on an art selection panel. We also work with the city councilor, with neighborhood organizations and neighborhood groups to kind of field those people. But again, I have to make sure that I'm reaching my goal of making sure that the panel is diverse and equitable and inclusive. Yeah.
Thanks.
And thank you. We'll take one more from the room and then see if there's any questions that are coming up in the webinar. Yes. Please.
My name is Toy. I live on the other side of Colorado Boulevard. I've been to a lot of these people. Some of them people talk about marginalized groups. One of the groups that constantly is overlooked, and I don't want to call them marginalized, not are elderly people. And excuse me, for just getting around, with the changes in the bus lines. But that's hard. It's really hard, and I don't want to see people that are left out.
Yes.
And so I don't know if you call them marginalized, but I do think that we have to be very, very sensitive. That you don't necessarily need to be disabled to be represented. There's a lot of elderly people who have homes. I'm really elderly that have had homes forever. the community, and I want to be able to meet and others to be able to access bus money without too much craziness.
We so appreciate that comment. And so for the folks online who may not have heard that, just questions around thinking about the aging community in terms when thinking about the design. And I can tell you that accessibility is a key criteria across the design team. And when we were doing and continue to do work on getting public input on the station design themselves, we were very intentional about engaging the aging community. And so when we get to that piece of the presentation, hopefully you'll see some of those ideas that have come from the aging community, as well as other communities, the communities blind and visually impaired, as well as the disabled community reflected in some of those early designs. So we very much appreciate that and hold that as a tenet to the design work that we're doing. Thank you. Let me see if there's any questions that are coming on from my colleague Emma from the webinar.
We have one question from Mary who asked about small business retention during construction. Is there a time frame for that? And what resources will be available to those businesses? And one reminder for the people answering, just be clear and speak slowly for our friends here over Zoom. Thanks.
But I'll tee it up and David, if you have additional commentary. So the Department of Economic Development Opportunity is a key partner of the project. So Joanne Greek, many of you know her name, she is sort of representing the project. Joanne has at this point put together a slide, and we can share that with you on the website, which sort of at a high level shares some of the tools and tips for small businesses to be aware of in advance of construction, and also makes available representatives that can support some of the small businesses in anticipation, again, of the project. We're a ways off from that. So as we get closer, there will be more details that come forth in support of small businesses, but recognizing how critical our small businesses are to the corridor and to the future of the corridor. And so again, it is a top priority and will become more detailed as we move further in the project. All right, we're going to keep going because I know that everyone's excited to hear the next the next portion of the presentation. I will simply acknowledge that in early 2021, we surveyed the community and we asked about your top 3 priorities for the project. So if we can go to the next slide. What you told us was clearly better service was a top priority, but closely following better service were improved safety, enhanced public spaces, which include bus stops and lighting and streetscape, public spaces, increased capacity and support of neighborhood plans. And so as we think about the next sort of set of topics that we're going to go through design and the opportunity for design, both in terms of the bus stops, the lighting, the streetscape, to really transform the way, the feel and the function of Colfax and make it sort of that safer, more comfortable place that I think everybody desires. An opportunity for Colfax really to become a connector of communities as opposed to just a throughway that goes through communities. And so we wanted to sort of use that to remind you of your priorities and think about that as we go through the next set of topics. I will also tee up the station design piece of this presentation. So I appreciated the comment about aging and consideration for sort of the needs of the aging community when we get to design. So you can go to the next slide. When we surveyed all of you last year and earlier this year, here's what you told us that you wanted to see in terms of the station design. You wanted to prioritize personal safety in the design of all features. You talked to us about adequate protection from weather, heat, rain, wind, all of it that we get here in Denver. You asked us to think about customizing stations. This goes back to the unique character segments across the corridor, so really reflecting that unique energy and unique vibe of those communities. Considering materials that were both absorbent of noise, because it can be particularly noisy, and also transparent materials to aid visibility along Colfax with a key piece. You asked us to consider sustainable elements, solar, the consideration for green infrastructure and trees in the design of the station, and then finally access to key rider information. whether that be maps, real-time information, and to do so with all groups in mind. So thinking about tactile and audible wayfinding as well. So I share that as tee-up to Kevin Ashby, who comes to us from Iron Horse Architects. Kevin has been leading the station design efforts and can share with you where we've landed with all of your input on the station design themselves. So I'll turn it over to Kevin, who's joining us virtually.
Great. Thanks so much, Abby. I wish I could be there with you tonight. I'm actually quarantining. I think COVID may have finally caught up with me. I'm not 100% sure, but I just wanted to address safety on that level. So anyway, we're really excited to be a part of this fantastic project. You know, the city has outlined that they really want an iconic line. And it's kind of a once in a generation, once in a lifetime opportunity to really do that. So we've had a number of public meetings, as Abby alluded to, and we've received a lot of really great feedback. And you know, some of those key elements, you know, that you just talked about, safety, comfort, you know, kind of that broader sense, accessibility. Those are all things that we've addressed initially. There's still a long way to go with the development of these stations, but we went out initially and we had sort of a range of themes and some variations on those themes, and we got that feedback. We then got down to kind of one concept or one theme that everyone really seemed to prefer, and that was both public and sort of on the more professional side of things. But most importantly, I think the public input was great. And then we got down to kind of a final concept that we're working with to kind of take forward. So there's still a lot of things to look at and advance, particularly, you know, I'll touch on some of those as we go through this. But that's sort of that high level overview. So I guess we could go to the next slide, please. So there were, this is sort of the leading candidate, if you will, which is sort of this asymmetrical arch that spans the length of the platform. And I think this resonated with people on many levels, but there's a real feeling of openness. So when you're on those platforms, you're going to feel very secure. You'll be able to see the shops around you, and people on the street will be able to see you on the platform, which I think is sort of critical. At the same time, you can see in the back, at the back of this platform, actually, we've got a kind of complete set of windscreens. So sort of from a comfort standpoint, we're providing a lot of weather protection, wind protection, rain protection, and those sorts of things. And then as you move down onto the platform, actually have a splash guard that runs all the way across the back of that. So if somebody is on the platform, they're really protected from the elements and from a splash of a vehicle going by. And then also from an accessibility standpoint, as an example, these are elevated platforms. They're about 14 inches up above the street level. At the entry end of every platform, there's a sloped area, and we've exceeded the ADA minimums there. So it's really not a ramp, it's just a sloped area. And so that's kind of an example of we're looking around to find ways that we can make this easier for people to use. Next slide. Kind of another view now looking down, and you're able to see kind of two of the stations kind of talking to one another, kind of in dialogue across the intersection. On the right hand of that image, you can see the windscreens, the splash guard. We're building in lots of seating so people feel comfortable. I think one of the critical things that we want to get into is lighting. And we've just got some preliminary ideas about that. Next slide, please. This is looking at that back view. So if you were driving or kind of over on the sidewalk again, the entire station area feels very open and transparent. And next slide, please. So another view back. We're trying to integrate in, seating, trash receptacles, signage, ticket dispensers, if we have those sorts of things, again, to make that platform feel really open, easy to move around, easy to navigate. We actually as Abby mentioned, went out to the aging community and the disability community and shared these concepts with everyone to get all that feedback. One of the interesting things I think we heard is acoustics is important. So we're still looking at that ceiling plane of that canopy and how we'll be able to treat that so people can hear announcements, or they can hear buses coming, or they can hear the activities around them so they feel really comfortable and safe on the platforms. Next slide. Oh, okay. I thought we might have had an evening shot, but anyway, that kind of summarizes where we're at. We've rendered these as white, but we haven't explored color yet. We haven't explored some of the other important things in terms of how we're going to apply branding. These renderings, as you can see, this sort of yellow CLFX, just sort of a placeholder there. The idea of having some civic signage on these platforms, and then how we're going to begin to integrate the art and those sorts of things to provide some variability from neighborhood to neighborhood or station to station. So that's kind of a summary.
Kevin, thank you for that. And hopefully quite a bit of this is familiar to many of you. So using this as sort of a starting place to talk further about design, I'd like to introduce Jay Rankin from MAG to talk with you a little bit about the early streetscape design concepts.
Great. Thank you, Abby. If you want to go to the next slide, you can go to the next slide again. So one of the things that we really want to do, not only build on community input that we've received in this process, but previous community input. There's been a lot of discussions, I think, that folks know, around the Colfax corridor that span really decades at this point. And some of those more recent efforts include some of the work in Blueprint Denver. The original Blueprint Denver in 2002 actually designated Colfax as a main street. I don't think a whole lot changed during the time that that original blueprint document was created, and then the follow-up in 2017. But now we have an opportunity to kind of think about what does Colfax the main street really mean through this process. Similarly, the East Central and East MPI area plans provided a lot of input in terms of what people wanted to see regarding placemaking, connectivity to Colfax, across Colfax, thinking about redevelopment opportunities. So those are a lot of the contextual cues we're looking at when we're thinking about the streetscape design to complement the stations, what's happening within the right-of-way in terms of moving cars, pedestrians, and obviously the BRT vehicles. Next slide. And I'll talk a little closer to the mic. So the next thing that we did, and taking really cues from a lot of those previous documents, was think about, I've never done on Main Street that, so we wanted to think about, well, what are those sort of subsections of Colfax? Some of those were informed by the MPI efforts, thinking about neighborhood adjacency. Some of those had to do with the business improvement district boundaries. And some of those had to do with just the character. If you kind of move along Colfax, you see variation in the buildings, probably most notably, how close they are to the street, the type of material, height in some cases, as well as how they're interacting with the street and with the pedestrian environment. And so we came up with 6 different sort of character areas or character segments, starting on the west end, the civic district. So having more of that kind of city beautiful kind of feel, large monuments, civic center station now adding to the state capitol, city hall, obviously being in that area. Next would be the urban retail in / Main Street. So this is where the street or the buildings are right next to each other. They're right up to the sidewalk edge, and for the most part, a lot of different storefronts and frontages. Next is the neighborhood Main Street. So it starts as you kind of head east, you get across the other side of Colorado. You're starting to see a little bit more breathing room along the right of way. So not all the buildings are right up to the street. There's space between the streets. A lot of times there's parking actually between the sidewalk and buildings. So we think that that has a different character. Next is sort of this community corridor area, extending from Monaco over to Yosemite. And then getting into Aurora, the original Aurora, and then Innovation District once we get out to the campus. So if we go to the next slide, Kevin started to tee this up, but one of the things that we really wanted to do based on the community input where we basically sort of this priority around variation and sort of unique expression at each of the stations, was think about what are those different ways that we can actually create variation and continuity. We don't want, each station to be so different that doesn't feel like it's part of the same corridor. That's not part of the same place, but we also want to celebrate the differences, maybe convey or set the tone for new development that might occur in certain places. And so we really think about it on 3 levels. One would be some opportunities to have some consistent elements across the entire corridor that may be expressed in the station kind of platform design that Kevin was talking about. It could be integrated into the crosswalk treatments, plantings that would happen on the sidewalk edge, as well as paving materials. And then we would think about the character segments. So that's where we see the similar colored dots. So there'd be groupings of stations where we'd have some common elements to reflect the character segments. And then we could use other elements that were really specific to the station. The name of the station is an obvious one, but there could be other pieces integrated into that glass on the station platform that Kevin was mentioning. Maybe the brick paving patterns, the public art that was mentioned earlier, could have very unique expressions at each station along the corridor. So kind of 3 different levels of streetscape design. Next slide. So this is just 2 examples, one actually from Mexico City, really beautiful street. It's the Paseo de la Reforma, Mexico City. And they actually have really consistent median elements along the entire corridor with slight variations once you get to different districts. The example on the right is from San Antonio, Texas. It's for their Primo line. And for that, they actually, each one of those stations in the 4 photos is the same structure. It's the same form, same type of roofing, same pillars. But what they've done is use color, lighting, and then different variations on the panels. So some of those are laser cut panels with different colors. Some of it's glass with etching to create variation and different expression in different places. Next slide. So on the sort of west end of the corridor, thinking about the Grand Avenue, kind of the the City Beautiful movement that I talked about, and the regional kind of Main Street character, that's where we want to pull in some of those consistent elements. Kind of the bigger moves that are really sort of most legible if you're moving quickly in a car or on the BRT, right? So those are things that you can kind of absorb when you're moving at a little faster pace. Next slide. But then when we think about the collection of local main streets, this sort of series of smaller main streets that are serving the local neighbors, and it's not just accommodating people moving, through the region or from one end of the corridor to the other. We want to think about the variation, and that's where we want to get into the pedestrian scale, those things that are really sort of intelligible to you, or sort of interpreted at that scale. And so it would be the brick pavers, that would be the more sort of finessed public art, thinking about signage and wayfinding at that level, and then the plantings as well. And so we're looking for those opportunities at each station location, as well as some continuity pieces that we can integrate in the segments between stations. Next slide. So when we think about the streetscape design, we've thought about some sort of requirements that we would be including across the entire corridor through the design regardless. And this kind of gets at one of the earlier questions about how do we make sure things don't get value engineered out. These are the things that we're going to make sure are included no matter what. So this includes paving of the platforms. That could be, there could be public art with mosaic tile integrated into that. There could be different paving treatments on the station platforms. Similarly, in the sidewalk, looking for opportunities to really create some splashes of color, maybe unique identity, telling stories of the corridor. There could be interpretive elements there. Similar with the corners and bulb outs, we really want to make those intentional spaces to not only improve the aesthetic, but improve safety. Crossings and medians, site furniture. So there are definitely segments along the corridor where there's no place to sit for several blocks. The lighting is inconsistent. So we're gonna be looking at opportunities to really remedy that, in addition to improving or sort of introducing trash cans and where necessary bollards. I mentioned the lighting already, planting street trees were one of those priorities that Abby highlighted. So looking for ways to keep and, the existing street trees, make those healthy, look for opportunities to add. And then other plantings, which would be primarily probably in raised planters, just because of the harsh conditions along Colfax when you think about 4 seasons, in salt and all of the snow removal, all those different things. So looking at protected plantings, but trying to green the corridor to the extent possible. Then of course the public art. Some optional items would include more decorative paving elements in more places. I'll show you some places that we intend to do that for sure, but in some more places. More enhanced crossing treatments, site furniture, other accent lighting that might actually kind of play with both the public realm, kind of the public right of way, as well as the private buildings, other plantings and public art. Next slide. So at this point in the process, we're starting to gather sort of representative ideas of the types of furnishings, including benches, trash receptacles, recycling, lighting, all those sorts of things, and then thinking about how we might integrate color. So we're trying to take cues from the preferred station platform design. So a little more contemporary, a little more modern feel. And then what we'll be doing is looking at those opportunities to weave in some of the historical elements. So we're really blending this idea of the history of the corridor, kind of embracing the present, and then looking to the future. Next slide. We're also thinking about the crossing treatments, thinking about that from a safety perspective, thinking about it from working with our partners on the project, the community members with disabilities, the aging community, but also looking for ways to maybe express, again, the character of different areas, or at least kind of a different feel for the BRT corridor versus the normal arterial across the community. Next slide. So I know these are a little tough to read. We have one example on one of the boards for the breakout session for those of you in the room. What we wanted to convey here, though, is that at this point in time, we're looking at 3 typical conditions. Moving forward, based on the community input we received tonight and throughout the rest of the summer, we'll be refining this and starting to apply it to the entire corridor. This is one example. This is at Pennsylvania, where there's a little more constrained right-of-way. And so you can see where we're trying to integrate some different colors of pavement on the corners, thinking about the crossing treatment to the platform itself, but also introducing planting on the corners. Next slide. A more typical condition, potentially, or hiring conditions still at Pennsylvania, may be actually beginning to integrate the entire intersection. So not just looking at the corners and sort of making sure the crosswalks are striped appropriately, but beginning to think of those as part of the overall streetscape design, maybe doing a different treatment of the crosswalk itself and as well as the intersection. And next slide. We know that there's a lot of conditions actually as you move eastward through the corridor where there's these offset intersections. They create some constraints and frankly some unsafe situations today. We think that this is a big opportunity not only in terms of streetscape design, but some of the elements around the overall design of the corridor to improve safety, but also improve the aesthetics. So this is one instance of a curb extension, or bulb out, some people call them. Where we'd actually be reducing the crossing distance. That also creates some opportunities for additional furnishings, public art, plantings, so on and so forth. And then really thinking about that as one intersection as we approach those versus 2 offset intersections. So that really helps with the safety aspects as well. Next slide. So again, looking at street trees, we're going to be looking for as many opportunities to introduce street trees as possible. There is a give and take when you think about a Main Street environment when it comes to street trees. In terms of comfort, in terms of sort of the sustainability aspect, trees are fantastic. But it does, sometimes the tree canopy can block signage or visibility of the businesses. So that's something that we'll be working with sort of individual blocks, the business improvement district as we're moving through that, looking for appropriate opportunities to integrate those. Next slide. And then, well, this is one of the last slides I have. We're beginning to explore different types of paving patterns that we think could be introduced in key locations. What we want to do is call out the special places for the community to gather, maybe places for the pedestrians to kind of tee up before crossing the street to the BRT or to another business, or maybe to the friend's house on the other side of the corridor. So there are 3 examples of different paving patterns. We can introduce different colors when we're looking at these. And the next slide starts to show how we're utilizing those. What we're thinking about actually is a design concept, because for 2 reasons. We don't want to put paving everywhere, this sort of special paving. One, it's busy and you kind of lose the specialness of it if it's everywhere. And 2, it's costly, quite honestly, versus just the normal way that you would do a sidewalk. And so what we're thinking about is, if you think in, your home, or maybe another or a friend's home with hardwood floors, oftentimes you'll use a carpet to call out special areas. Maybe it's the sitting area, it's the dining area. So what we're doing is thinking about the use of pavers to call out these special areas. And so the platform itself may be one of those, and likely will be, as well as key intersections, as well as places where we sort of put new seating, new planting, and creating these areas for social gathering and congregation. Next slide. So some of the things that we would like to hear about, whether it be in the Q&A, definitely afterwards, as we're available for the open house. What aspect of those different character segments, or even individual stations, do you think are really special and should be celebrated as we move forward in the design? Also thinking about particular aspects of the conceptual streetscape design that are kind of calling, or it's kind of speaking to you, or if you have sort of advice in it, we advance that. So around the crosswalk treatments, the street furniture, as well as the brick and timber patterns. With that, I'll turn it back over to
Jay, thank you. We're always excited when we have something tangible for the community to react to, like the color, and you'll have an opportunity to do that, as Jay mentioned, in this area. So all the content he walked through, Jay and team will be in this side of the room, which will mean something to the folks in the room and not to those virtually. So apologies for that. I do also appreciate the mention of safety and comfort for all people moving through the corridor. And I think that tees up the discussion around traffic safety and parking very nicely. And so I'd like to turn it over to Charlie Alexander from Fair and Peer to really talk through early insights from that analysis. So Charlie, welcome you up.
Great, thank you, Abby. Good evening, everyone. As Abby said, my name is Charlie Alexander. I'm a transportation engineer. I live and work here in Denver, so this project is very interesting to me, and very excited to be a part of it and tell you more about the analysis we've been up to. What I'm going to do tonight is try to summarize about a year's worth of work that constitutes probably thousands of pages of analysis in 15 minutes. So to that effect, I tried to make this work as accessible as possible. It is very technical. It has a lot of numbers and tables. I will do my best to explain that sort of in layman's terms. And as we're going to be limited in our Q&A time, I will be right up here for Q&A afterwards for anyone whose questions we're not able to answer in the group forum. To tee up the conversation, it's helpful to think about this project in the context of where the city is trying to go overall with transportation. As David mentioned earlier, we don't have room to widen the roads in Denver. We're built out as a city, so you got to find a way to do more with the space that we do have. To that effect, Denver's Mobility Action Plan includes strategic goals around providing choice and travel options, improving travel safety, and striving to eliminate deaths and serious injuries on the transportation system, improving climate and public health, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then accessibility, making the system accessible for everyone. So to think about those broader citywide goals and sort of think about how does the Colfax project sort of play a role in achieving those broader city goals? You can see some of the goal statements here on the left, improving traffic safety by pursuing Vision Zero, developing multimodal travel options, reducing impacts to the environment, and some of the specific questions that we've been aiming to answer as a part of our analysis for the Colfax BRT. How much will the project reduce crashes on Colfax Avenue, starting with safety? How much will the project increase transit ridership in providing travel choice? And how much will the project reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions? First jargon term there, vehicle miles traveled. If you get in your car and drive 1 mile, that is 1 vehicle mile of travel. If you sum up all of the driving that you do and everyone else in Denver and across the region does, that collectively is the total amount of vehicle miles traveled across the city or across the region. VMT, vehicle miles traveled, has a direct relationship to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why we're looking at VMT in this context to understand the climate change impact of the project. Next slide. So let me start by walking through some of the project benefits and what we're finding about what the project is doing to help achieve some of these goals, and then talk about some of the other effects of the project as well. So first, how much will the project reduce crashes on Colfax? Anywhere from minus 24% to minus 14% is what we're seeing in our analysis thus far. And I'll talk through some of the variants in that range and explain the methodology here in a minute. Simply stated, the project will reduce crashes on Colfax Avenue. How much will the project increase transit ridership? We have to use specific models from the Federal Transit Administration for this project. They require that we use those models so that as they evaluate all of the projects across the country, they're evaluating them all on an apples-to-apples basis. Those models are showing us that we're going to see an increase in transit ridership anywhere from approximately a quarter to a third increase from ridership today, in the ballpark of 6,000 to 7,500 boardings per day increase with the Colfax BRT project. And then lastly, this question related to how much will the project reduce vehicle miles traveled? Somewhere in the ballpark of 30,000 vehicle miles traveled saved per day. You do the math and convert that out to pounds of CO2 emissions. That works out to about 20,000 pounds of CO2 reduced per day with improvements in transit service on Colfax. So let me walk through some of the underlying data that sort of goes into those broader conclusions and talk about some of the other performance measures we've been evaluating as well. This chart evaluates just the transit travel times for the 15 and 15L on Colfax. Looking approximately now, we use 2019 as our analysis year to understand sort of things that were happening before the pandemic, call that our existing condition, if you will, and then looking 20 years into the future, 2040, what we call our future analysis scenario. You can see that in the no-build conditions, our transit travel times for the 15 and 15L are varying anywhere from around 34 minutes to 50 minutes currently, going up to 65 minutes in 2040. I think that's an important thing to recognize, that the do-nothing option on Colfax doesn't look very good. That 65 minutes is largely related to increases in traffic congestion in the area and the buses incurring their due part of that travel time. With the build, 35 minutes, regardless of time of day, direction of travel, and levels of traffic in the area. What that means is we're seeing 25 to 30 minutes of savings, depending on if you're comparing the BRT to the 15 or the 15L, which is very significant. Just some other things I want to mention here. The bus frequency of 4.3 minutes is very comparable to the overall frequency of what's on the corridor today when you consider both the 15 and the 15L. The one thing I will say is that the 15 and 15L do not operate at 4.3 minute frequency. They all operate at a higher frequency, 8 or 10 minutes. That it is possible that you can spend more time waiting on the corridor than 4 minutes now, depending on whether you want to catch the 15, whether you want to catch the 15L, what stop you're trying to get to. The bus frequency in this scenario is a much more simplified delivery of service that's much more intuitive and easier for everyone to use. We also know that bus reliability will improve as a part of the project. Again, 35 minutes independent of time of day and direction of travel or incidents that are happening on the corridor. So that's a big benefit of the project. The effect of improving those travel times is that we see that increase between 24% and 31%. So approximately increase of a quarter to a third of the ridership today. Ridership today and in the future is around 25,000 boardings per day. Seen that go up to around 30 to 33,000, or I guess 32,000 rides per day in the 2040 future year. So a pretty significant increase in ridership resulting from the project, which is sort of feeding into those numbers related to the vehicle miles traveled reduced. And then this is just reiteration of those vehicle miles traveled, the VMT number, and the corresponding greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 on a daily basis. I am not a CO2 emissions expert, but we have run a few conversions to understand and try to make more tangible, how much is reducing CO2 emissions by 20,000 per day. And it is a pretty significant number and one we're hoping to make more relatable here in the future. So I'm going to walk through in more detail some of the analysis and other findings related to safety, parking, and some of the traffic effects of the project, starting with safety first. The method that we use here is we use what's called the Highway Safety Manual, where we're actually able to do what's called a predictive safety analysis. So many safety analyses are reflective, they're reactive, they're looking at crashes that have already happened and aims of minimizing those in the future. With predictive safety, we're actually looking into the future to understand what crashes we think might happen in the future and how we can mitigate those and what the effects are of projects like this. So to do that, we compare existing conditions to a 2040 scenario where we don't build the project. We call that our 2040 no build, and then 2040 build, where with the project in place, accounting for things like the number of people on the street, the way that the street is configured, whether the travel lane arrangement, the sidewalks, the parking, things about the street's operation, like the operating speed on the street and the signal timings, and then some other more qualitative factors like enforcement and key destinations proximate to the corridor. So these are those minus 24% and minus 4% numbers. This is how we derive it. So you can see that we do a separate analysis for signalized intersections and then for segments between them. We model the number of crashes that the Highway Safety Manual would expect in a 2019 existing scenario. We compare that to what happens into the future in that 2040 no-build scenario. You can see the expectation into the future is that without the project, the number of crashes would increase. And then we account for some of those changes, like the roadway configuration, the operating characteristics with the project in the 2040 build scenario. You can see we're reducing the crashes on the corridor. That includes all crashes as well as the severity of crashes. So fatal and severe injury crashes as well expected to come down. Some of the things about the project, this first bullet in that 2040 build scenario that are contributing to that reduction in crashes, things like raised median in portions of the corridor, protected left turns at traffic signals. So this is if you're making a left turn at a traffic light and you can only do that on a green arrow, that is a protected left turn. That is a treatment that has a proven safety benefit. Modifying the street's cross section with the transit only lanes and reduced quantities of on-street parking that I'll speak to in a moment. Frankly, reduced traffic volumes on Colfax related to the transit only lanes, and then transit signal priority. All of those things are having a beneficial effect on the safety outcomes of the project. We are doing some work to further understand some of the pedestrian specific safety measures that we aim to include into the project. Things like leading pedestrian intervals, which is a way of operating the signals so the pedestrians get a head start in crossing the street, street lighting at night, other measures to address crossings that are happening away from the traffic signals on the corridor. And as we move into the fall months of 2022, we will be expanding this analysis to the parallel streets in the study area in Denver so that we can be making similar safety recommendations as we, making recommendations and then implementing safety improvements on those corridors along with the Colfax BRT project. Oh, this is the next one. Oh, sorry, go back. Text on text. There we go. So moving into the parking analysis. So what we're trying to do with this work is understand what is the effect of the project on the on-street parking supply on Colfax, not necessarily looking at the supply of off-street spaces, but really the space is on street. So if you look at the corridor, all the way from Broadway to Yosemite, the corridor has slightly fewer than 1,000 parking spaces. And we've looked at this multiple times a day, multiple days of the week. At any given time, this circle, only about a third of those spaces are actually occupied. So to do that, we actually put a dash cam in the car. We drive the corridor multiple times a day, multiple times per week, and sort of understand how does demand for parking change. For instance, on a weekday, midday, weekday evening versus a Friday evening versus a Saturday night, so that we can understand the peaking of parking across the area. So 970 spaces today. The project will reduce that by about 300 spaces. But again, only about a third of those are occupied at any given time. Now, that said, occupancy in some segments is high during those peak hours of demand, particularly for the western portions of the corridor from Grant Street to Josephine Street. Obviously, if you're trying to get to a destination in the west part of the corridor, an available parking space out by Yosemite isn't particularly of use to you. So we're trying to take a look at this at a more granular level to understand how those different segments will work with the project. I'll go through some of the analysis here in a minute, but the recommendation from this is that as a part of the design, the city will be preparing what's called a curbside access plan for the area from Broadway to Garfield. Garfield's just a couple blocks west of Colorado Boulevard. And what we will do in that plan is identify changes to parking restrictions so that we can best balance the different activities and demands on Colfax and in the connecting streets. So as I mentioned, demand, particularly in the segments from Grant to Josephine, is really the highest on the corridor. And that 31% overall occupancy number doesn't really tell the full story of what's happening, frankly, in these busier blocks from a parking perspective. So the question that we wanted to answer once we knew the overall supply and demand picture on Colfax was, how does demand sort of work in these different sub areas along the corridor in these what we call zones, which you can see here, 4 zones, 4 different colors, sort of under the assumption that if you're trying to get to a destination in this zone, someone can walk a block or 2 to get to that destination, and it's still relatively convenient. So we did different zones, Grant to Downing, Grant to Washington, Washington to Downing, Downing to Williams, and Williams to Josephine, to understand not just how parking on Colfax work, but how parking demand in these zones work, and whether or not there was adequate parking in these zones to serve the demand that exists. So this table summarizes the parking numbers in those zones. West to east, top to bottom. What you can see here is the net change in parking supply for that segment of Colfax. So you can see the reduction in parking supply on Colfax that the BRT project in. It turns out that in these areas, the peak of demand was a Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. So the next column, the third column shows the available supply. So it's actually the spaces that were available in those zones in that Friday to 6 from 6 to 7 p.m. period, and then the remaining supply available. So that's sort of the column where the results come out, and you can see that in all but one area we have additional supply beyond that which we're reducing the supply in Colfax to sort of offset that loss, with the exception of the segment from Downing to Williams Street. That's why that curbside access management plan is so important, so that we can optimize all of the curbs in those areas and make sure that we're balancing the needs of all the users in the area, both on Colfax and in intersecting streets and neighborhoods. Just for some perspective, we did not do a detailed look at the off-street parking supply. Obviously, once it's on private property, there's all sorts of regulations about who can and cannot park there. But we did take a look for some of those more constrained segments to understand just what sort of supply there was for public parking in publicly accessible lots, not associated with the business, but pay to park lots. From Grant to Washington, there's currently around 575 public parking spaces. And in that segment from Downing to Williams, the one where we're short by 7 spaces, approximately 155 public parking spaces. Okay, so segueing, and these are my last few slides here, into traffic. There's lots of different ways of measuring the ease of driving, the ease of moving by vehicle with a project like this. One that is frankly easiest for everyone to understand is travel times. How long is it going to take me to get from A to B if I use these streets now into the future? So we've done a very detailed modeling analysis with models that are frankly state of the practice and have done a lot of hard work to be able to estimate what we think that effect will be of the project on travel times in the study area. So what this graphic on the bottom shows is Colfax Avenue in purple from Broadway to I-225, and then the parallel streets 17th and 18th on the top in pink, and 13th to 14th on the bottom in blue, where they generally begin and end. So for 17th, that goes all the way from Broadway out to Aurora, close to the Fitzsimmons campus. Abby mentioned earlier, 13th and 14th begins at Broadway, but once you get east to Yosemite, the character of it really changes. So we look just at that shorter segment of 13th and 14th. So you can see the lengths of those different corridors in the area. 17th and 18th going for 7.5 miles, Colfax almost 9 miles, 13th and 14th 5.5 miles. It's important to note that not everyone driving on these streets drives the full length of the corridor. So I put on the bottom here in black, the average trip length of people moving on these streets is a little over 3 miles, and that black bar is approximately the scale. So obviously that means that on Colfax, the typical trip is just about 1/3 of the length of Colfax in our area. I say that because the next thing you'll see is the increase in travel time we expect with the project looking both 2019 and 2040, sort of a broad range here that depends a little bit depending on time of day and direction of travel. But what we're generally seeing on 17th and 18th, 1 to 7 minutes of increased travel time, Colfax 6 to 9 minutes, 13th and 14th, 1 to 7 minutes. On average, travel time is going to go up by about a minute per mile. So what that means, sort of in the summary bullet at the top, is that typically people traveling these corridors today into the future will experience 2 to 3 minutes more of travel time in the peak direction resulting from the project. Those, plus 1 minute travel times, those are frankly the off-peak directions. So if you're traveling, out of downtown in the morning, or if you're traveling into downtown in the afternoon, that's when you would be experiencing those off-peak travel time changes. So to look at this a little bit more granularly, the other thing that we look at is how are the different intersections in the study area operating. The model that we've developed includes over 100 of the signalized intersections in the area. It takes like a whole day to run the thing, so it's quite an endeavor to pull these results out. So what you can see here in the rows is intersections with low to average delay. Those of us in the traffic industry call this level of service. It's done on a grading scale from A to F, where level of service A through C represents those lower to average delays. And then in the bottom row, you can see the number of intersections with longer delays or congested conditions. Again, those of us in the traffic engineering business would call those level of service B to level of service F intersections. And you can see for 2019, 2040, AM and PM peak hours across the build and the no build and the build scenarios, the number of intersections that are going to operate at each of these different levels. And if you can flip through the animations, which will pull up the highlights here, what I want to point out is that the effect of the project is that we're taking really no more than 3 or 4 intersections that are operating in that low to average delay scenario and pushing those where those will be operating with those longer delays or more congested conditions. So again, over 100 signalized intersections in the study area. The effect of the project of causing chronic congestion, we're not seeing that. We're seeing a handful of intersections that are operating low to average move into those longer delays. Some of those that are experiencing longer delays now are continuing to experience longer delays, or those delays are increasing. That's definitely an effect we're seeing. But what we're not seeing is all 100 intersections operating in those longer delay or congested conditions. We've been doing a lot of work to understand different things that can be done off of the Colfax corridor to improve mobility through the study area. And this is just a quick summary of some of the things that we are assuming as a part of the project to improve the conditions for traveling through the study area. Things like upgrading some of the ways that the signals operate, so they're a little bit more responsive to the demand rather than operating on a fixed clock, if you will. That's the pre-time signals to actuated coordinated signals. The addition of turn lanes in some locations, dual southbound left turn lanes at 17th and Park, so that more people can easily get on the park. A westbound right turn lane just out, let's see here, at Colfax and Elizabeth to serve the demand for people trying to get to East High School in the morning. Northbound left turn lanes at 13th in Colorado and 17th in Colorado to offset the reduction in traffic that will be turning left from Colorado onto Colfax. And then some left turn operations. I described the protected only operation compared to like left turn on Green Ball, some upgrades to left turns at 17th in Quebec and Colfax and Yosemite. Traffic calming and speed management. I mentioned that we would be doing a deeper dive on the safety analysis for the parallel streets, 13th, 14th, 17th, 18th. As a part of that, we expect to be identifying and developing designs to implement different traffic calming and speed management measures to offset some of the increases in traffic volume on those parallel streets. And then for all of these things, ongoing monitoring in the project area so that as the project is built and if there are things that happen that we don't anticipate, we can be on top of those and working to improve that. One more slide here in summary. So just to bring it all back, where I began in the traffic narrative was understanding what are the city's broader goals for transportation? How does the Colfax project fit within those goals? We talked about the reduction in crashes, the increase in travel choice and boardings, the reduction in BMT and greenhouse gas emissions. Frankly, there will be some effects of the project. We know that we need to do a curbside access plan so that we best optimize the use of the curb space on Colfax and in the area so that everyone has fair access to the curb, and recognizing that there will be modest increases in delay for people driving. I mentioned about 3 minutes on average for people driving through the area for the sake of achieving these broader benefits that the city's working through this project and others to achieve citywide. So that wraps up the traffic piece of this. I'm going to hand it back to Abby. I worked with the Gabby Mathis and I did that yesterday, so that she can moderate Q&A. And as I mentioned, I will be here as long as necessary to answer additional questions on this topic.
Charlie, thank you. I'm going to do a couple of things in anticipation of Q&A. First of all, I'll note it is a rare individual that can bring such clarity and simplicity to such technical analysis. So I want to thank you again, Charlie, for that. I'd like to bring up the lights a little bit. Thank you. I recognize that it's getting close to 7. We don't want you all falling asleep in the Q&A session, so appreciate that. And as we go, I want to also recognize our representation here. So apologies for not doing that earlier, but Joe Wood from Representative Get's office. Thank you, and Lisa Rodriguez from City Council District 5. So thank you very much for attending tonight. I will ask as we move into Q&A we're going to start with the virtual folks. I'm recognizing that all of you have a great opportunity to engage with the subject matter experts more deeply here in the room. So I want to start with the folks joining us virtually. I would ask as we do that, try to keep your questions at a fairly high level, recognizing that again, you'll have the opportunity to go in great detail with the folks in the room. So I'm going to turn it over to you to ask if there's any questions on the webinar.
Thanks, Abby. We had a few questions as it relates to station design and weather. So, Kevin, if you're still on, can you tell us a little bit more about how the station design will protect from inclement weather and make folks comfortable during snow and windy days?
Yeah, I don't know if we could go back to one of the images. That would probably be the best thing. Overall, these are fairly large stations to begin with. So the canopies are spanning 45 to 50 feet in length. They're the full width of the platform. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have windscreens that are all along the back edge of the platform that go to between 8 and 9 feet. We're still studying some of those details and things. But it will really provide fairly extensive weather protection. The scale of these is really much larger than a typical station, or some of the 15L enhanced stations, for example. Right now, we're probably in that 15-foot range. So this is about 3 times as long as those. And again, that canopy is the full width of the platform. And then as you can see this image, that whole windscreen and splash guard on the back side.
Kevin, thank you. And I'll note that these images also are posted on the website in the virtual engagement hub. So if you want to take a closer look, that's a great way to do that. Any other questions from the webinar?
Yeah, one more on multimodal transit, Eamon. How will the project team incorporate bike paths and other types of multimodal transit into these plans?
Yes, I can take that question. So this is a great question that sort of alludes to the idea of station access, right? We want to make it that people can walk and bike to get to the BRT stops and then get that reliable, quick travel time. So the city has a philosophy that's called One Build. So they aim to sort of achieve multiple objectives when they implement a project like this. So as a part of the design, we're looking at sort of the One Build opportunities to do a couple things. One is improve the sidewalk network within the proximity of these stations, but also to improve the connecting bikeways that the city is working to implement for a variety of initiatives, including the community network planning, design, and implementation effort. Now, that in particular, we're interested in the north-south streets to sort of make it so that people from the nearby neighborhoods can connect into the Colfax corridor and get to those stops and stations.
And in the interest of time, I'll hand it back to you, Abby, to go to the room. Just as a reminder, if your questions were not answered in the Q&A virtually, I will drop into the chat the project website as well as the project email. If you want to send those questions, we will direct them to the appropriate team member.
Great, and it's correct that we're going to keep the webinar open just for a little bit so that they can add their questions if they haven't been submitted already. Excellent, thank you. Any questions in the room? Yes. So, 1 moment.
Thanks. Just a few design questions. First, Denver is a famously sunny place. Even walking over here before these clouds came in, I was very conscious of which side of the street I was on, so I was in shade from buildings. We're asking people to wait in the middle of the street, so it's really vital and important that those canopies shade them. I would notice that on all of Kevin's slides, despite the canopy, people were in the full sunlight, and more people rendered there. So my question is, would you be doing a shade study to figure out, are they actually going to be in shade? And does that need to be different facing north and facing south? So we're doing that. Second design question is medians. Jay, you mentioned medians. Earlier on in the project, there were to be essentially corridor long medians that might get narrow in between the stations and wider, of course, create the stations. Well, over on these roll plots, I'm not seeing any hint of any medians. So I'm hoping that's still there, because one of the dangerous parts of Colfax is people playing Frogger across the street. And it would be helpful if there were some medians. I love your picture from Mexico City. And then finally, on safety, Colfax is one of the most dangerous streets in terms of deaths in the city. And some of that has to do with where pedestrians are crossing, of course, but a lot of that has to do with speed. Are you seeing in your modeling what we all intuitively know? When traffic volumes are low, it's a very wide street, people go fast. Are people going to, regardless of the posted speed, are people going to go slower with the streets than because?
Great, Joel, so let's take that from backwards to the sort of from the last to first. So Charlie, if you could address the question about speed, and then Jay will have him talk about medians the next chapter.
Yes, so in regards to operating speed on Colfax, we do expect that to go down with the project. Just functionally, I think we can all recognize that with 2 lanes in each direction, sort of the maximum speed tends to be dictated by the fastest person driving on the corridor, because you get around slower moving vehicles. By going down to 1 travel lane in each direction, the operating speed tends to be more dictated by the slower moving vehicles, and everyone's sort of waiting behind them. So all of the travel time analysis that I presented accounts for that change in operating speed, but we do expect it to come down with the project.
On the median consideration, the photo from Mexico City was an example of a consistent element. Regarding sort of the integration, there's 2 different aspects that we're thinking about. One is right of way, where can we actually fit medians? So we're going to be looking for those opportunities
I mentioned to you, we were kind of looking at indicative or representative intersections at this point. So we'll be looking for additional opportunities to create, in particular in those places where we want to restrict either pedestrian movement and prevent the jaywalking that creates some unsafe conditions, or turning movement, that would be discouraged or prohibited as well. So absolutely looking for the additional meeting opportunities. And then Kevin, I think if you want to hit the shade question.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, we will be studying that in more detail. We have some limitations of where we can place the canopy based on the vehicle design. But as I mentioned, we're trying to really maximize the width of that from platform edge to platform edge. And there's probably some opportunities to look at what sort of glass, or whether we can use a glass with some sort of frit for the windscreen that could provide some additional shading and solar protection.
Thank you. And I'll note that the station sign is still being refined, right? So it's still in process, and so you'll see some more of those details as the topic goes forward. I'll take 2 more questions in the room, and then we'll take it to open house. So, yes, please.
Name's Richard. Quick question.
1 moment, just wait for the mic to be online. Yeah, thank you.
So you talk about the design speeds coming down, and the roads are 12-foot wide, same as that we build on highways. I'm not sure how that's going to come down just by saying it's going to come down. Or what design speed is the road made at? Are there crossings for pedestrian crossings? So cars will have to slow down at intersections, or can they continue on their regular speeds?
Dancing with the building here. James is here. Where's James in the back? Jay, can you come up and just clarify the current posted versus design? The technical degree engineer. Yeah, thought so. And then with that, I'll come back and talk a little bit about those operating characteristics. So if we can answer the design C question.
So right now, the posted speed equals the design speed. So west of Colorado, it's 30 miles an hour, and east is 30 miles.
How are you going to do that? You're going to put a speed limit up and say go 30?
Yes.
You can strip the road.
So yeah, it comes back to the point that I mentioned earlier in regards to what dictates the operating speed. And yeah, obviously you probably know this, there's a lot of different ways of analyzing speeds, right? And when we look at the speed profile, we're looking at things like the average speed, we're looking at things like the 85th percentile, which would say if you measure 100 cars, so it's the 85th fastest one, right? So typically what happens in this scenario where we're reducing a travel lane is that we tend to eliminate the highest, the fastest moving people in the area, because they're the ones that are doing the passing in the left lane. They're the ones that then tend to be more obstructed by vehicles in front of them operating at a more reasonable speed. So, whether we think that it's right to analyze it according to the average or 85th, there's a lot of industry push to look at different ways of measuring speed, but it's really those highest end speeds that by going from 2-lane speed structure to 1 that we're reducing, recognizing that, the design speed is the design speed. Those frequent speeders are the ones, or those super speeders are the ones that we're most wanting to eliminate with a project like this.
It sounds like we're hoping that people will obey the speed, but are there any raised crosswalks?
I'm just going to pause for a second and ask that if you'd like to ask a follow-up, if you could bring the mic to you, just because nobody online can hear you. So, yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
I'll say one more thing.
Why don't you just quickly say your follow-up question?
Yeah, I just think it sounds like you hope they're gonna do the speed limit. What is gonna, I understand the one-way traffic, that's kind of help. Are there gonna be any raised crosswalks that would help?
So first of all, the current posted speed will be unchanged. We haven't reduced the design input with this project. Just want to clarify that. The other thing, some of the lanes will be reduced. So on the back side of the platform, where we only have one general purpose lane, that'll be 12 feet. There'll be more narrow lane that will result in some reduced speed.
Yeah, and I think that is a great question for the open house forum. So to go in more detail and to walk over to the roll plots, and talk through that. We'll take one more question, in the room. Yes, please, and then we'll go to open forum.
Thank you. I'm from Aurora, and a lot of the safety and the traffic stopped at the border of Aurora tonight. And we have a lot of parking on the street in Aurora all day, all evening, everything. And that wasn't taken into consideration. So I'm a little concerned that I came to hear about Aurora and I'm not hearing anything about Aurora.
I appreciate that. And I know the city of Aurora has been a key partner in this. And so I'd like to ask just quickly, David, if you could just talk through the alignment in Aurora, and then Charlie, if you have anything to add in terms of the any insights from the analysis with respect to Aurora.
Okay, so David Krutzinger, Transit Director for Denver. In coordination with our Aurora partners, Aurora is adding money to the project to improve stations, and then some of the 15L stations that we have in Denver, we're going to relocate some of those 15L shelters to places in Aurora that don't have any shelters to speak of. So we're overall improving Aurora. In terms of the traffic flow, there's no net change to how traffic operates or parking in Aurora. And that was going back all the way to the very beginning, the comment that I made. There's kind of a change in the character of the streets at around the Yosemite, and Charlie also referenced that. So there's no change in parking or travel speeds in the Aurora section. Just to follow up on the safety side of things, Aurora, Tom, would you mind raising your hand real quick? Tom Worker Braddock is here, planner with the city of Aurora. And Tom, maybe you can stick around for a few minutes to help Colleen with her questions. I would say Aurora Traffic has been very involved in all of our conversations related to traffic and safety. We haven't, we presented a lot of Denver focused analysis tonight in all of our meetings on this project. It's Denver, it's Aurora, it's CDOT talking through these issues together. How those different pieces analytically are coming out is a little bit more in waves, which you obviously picked up on tonight. So I do think there's a strong appetite from Aurora Traffic to start looking at things similarly, but because I can't make commitments on behalf of the city, I'll let Tom speak to that Q&A unless there's anything you'd like to say now.
You can identify the paranoid folks here. Yeah, and I'll just reemphasize that a lot of this analysis on the Denver side was done because we're fundamentally changing the aspect of Colfax, basically completely removing the lane of traffic, having the buses run in their own dedicated bus lane down the middle of the street. Once it gets into Aurora, those buses will be running in mixed traffic on the side of the street. So we won't be removing any traffic lanes from Colfax and Aurora. We won't be impacting any parking in Aurora because of the buses. So that presents a flip side experience of, people will have a very different experience riding the bus in Aurora than when they get to Denver. But right now, that's what it will be. It will be a side running mixed traffic operation in Aurora.
Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate you being here and encourage you to have some follow-up conversation, go into a little bit more detail. I want to thank all of the folks who joined us virtually. First, I know we've gone over a bit. Appreciate you hanging in there. As Emma mentioned before, if you have follow-up questions, please post them in the chat. In terms of next steps, if you don't mind just going to the next slide really quickly. I just want to acknowledge that we will be doing some pop-up events in your communities. And so please look out for us on August 4th at the Health Fair with the PAX Partnership. We'll also be joining the Colfax bid for movie night. We'll have some information there on August 17th. And likely another targeted community workshop, more to come on that. And you'll be made aware of that as soon as we know. And then lastly, just encourage you to stay engaged. You all are clearly engaged community members. Here are the ways to do that. If we can go to the next slide. You're familiar with the project website and the virtual engagement hub. I'm assuming, if not, please visit those. Great content there. And we'll have content from this meeting up there shortly. And likewise, the project email. We welcome your questions if they haven't been answered tonight. So again, thank you for your participation, your patience. For those folks in the room, let me quickly orient you to the stations and encourage you to go and have the conversations and ask the questions that are top of mind for you. So you'll note a couple of roll plots. So basically what this is moving west to east. So this goes from Broadway Civic Center to Colorado. So everything west of Colorado is on this side. If you move over to this section, the roll plots, so everything east of Colorado. And so if you live in certain neighborhoods and you want to have discussions, go there accordingly. Feel free to put post-its on the roll plots, what you'd like, what you're concerned about, and so forth. Over here in front, and we may move this, the BRT logo development options. If you haven't taken the survey, please do so. We'd love to hear your feedback on those logos. In this section over here, a lot of the content that Jay presented on streetscapes. And so Jay, I know, is interested in your feedback on the character areas, and particularly on some of the elements, what you like and what you may not like about some of those elements. And then finally, if you didn't get a close enough view of the station designs as they stand today, please feel free to come up here and take a closer look. I think I've covered the stations. And with that, we will close this portion of the meeting and welcome you to have your conversations. Thank you all for joining.